hello and welcome to this month's Tippie Lunch and Learn webinar, Practical Insights from the University of Iowa's Tippie College of Business, served over the lunch hour and ready to use right away. Today's special, Workplace Wellbeing. Because many of you join us over the lunch hour, we always like to get things kicked off with a shout out to a food-themed alum doing great work. So, it's March. The Oscars just wrapped up. A big year, big show hosted by Conan O'Brien. We thought it was the perfect time to highlight a Tippie alum who's been popping up on snack shelves for decades. Steve Husenga, who earned his BBA in 1988, is the president of American Popcorn Company, the folks behind Jolly Time Popcorn, based right here in Iowa, just like a great bag of popcorn. Building resilience and well-being at work is all about finding the right conditions to help things pop. Oh, sorry about that. I promise it'll be the last of the food-based puns for a couple minutes. Whether that's the right boundaries, the right relationships, or the right moment to say yes or no. More on workplace well-being from people much smarter than me shortly. We'd also love to hear about your favorite spots with a Tippie connection. Do you have a favorite restaurant run by one of our alums? Or is there an alum doing things in the food and beverage industry? Drop it into the chat, and we may feature them in a future Lunch and Learn to celebrate our alumni in the world of food. Now, before we dive into today's conversation, here's what's next up on the Tippie Lunch and Learn menu. So we are sitting here on Tuesday, March 24th. On March 25th, yes, that's tomorrow, the fourth season of our podcast, Tippie Leads, launches. The theme of this season is being the CEO of your life. So in next month's webinar, we're taking a look at how you can be the CEO of your calendar, mastering the high-stakes yes and the strategic no. We are going to be joined by Associate Professor of Practice Rob Rauenhorst and Associate Professor Michelle Williams at noon on Tuesday, April 28th, to discover the habits of yes that build momentum and open doors, and the relational science behind a strategic no that protects your priorities without damaging your reputation. Come ready to stop being a passenger in your own schedule and start leading your calendar like the CEO of your life. We'll drop that registration link for the next Lunch and Learn into the chat. I see it there already. And if there's a topic that you'd like to see served up by our Tippie faculty in a future session, let us know in the chat. We love hearing your ideas. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on our Tippie alumni and lifelong learning pages, as well as our YouTube channel. Past webinars are also free and open to the public, so feel free to share. Now, let's dive into our main course. Again, we talked about the theme of the podcast, being the CEO of your life. The idea is simple. The most effective leaders don't just lead their organizations, they lead themselves. They're intentional about their time, their energy, and their relationships. And that's what today is all about. Your expertise gets you the job, but your well-being is what keeps you in the game. To help us think through that, I'm thrilled to introduce Beth Livingston, Associate Professor at Tippie, whose research focuses on work and well-being, and Kati Schneider, Director of Tippie Thrive, who puts these ideas into practice every day with our students at Tippie. They're going to talk, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. Please submit yours using the Q&A button right down here. It's got that question mark on it. And we can organize and get those to Beth and Kati as well. Now, let's get started. Take it away, Beth.
Thanks, Nick. I'm very excited to be with you all today. Thank you for taking time out of your lunch to spend time with Katie and I today. We are going to be talking about these practical strategies from two different perspectives. So, we're going to start out with Katie talking about focusing on the self, and then I'm going to start talking about focusing on others. So, Katie, would you like to start us off with focusing on practical strategies for the self?
Yes, great. Thanks, Beth. So before I get started, I just want to make a note that what I'm going to present on today is a very broad topic. There's many different aspects related to well-being, and this is just one little snippet, and it's kind of something for you to plant a seed and kind of see what it is that sticks with you, and maybe it's something that you want to continue to further on. It takes a lot of time and intentionality with these aspects, and so it's just not an easy process. I also just want to make it clear that this is not a tailored presentation to you specifically. And so I'm mindful of circumstances that you might be experiencing that may make some of these applications harder to apply than others. So just wanting to be mindful of those aspects as we get started for today. So to get us started, when we're experiencing challenges and stressful times, it can really be common that we feel like there's so many things that are out of our control. And while there are things that are out of our control, there are so many things that are in our control as well. And so when we can shift our mindset to being focused on what's in our control, it can have so much potential for us to be resilient and overcome the challenges that we are experiencing. So on this slide here, it represents those things that are out of our or are in our control when we are experiencing things. For purposes of today, we're going to be spending most of our time thinking about how the thoughts are in our control and what we can do to manage our thoughts in a healthy way that leads us to be more resilient and manage stressful times. So we have situations that happen to us all day long. Good situations, bad situations, situations that fall somewhere in between. And those situations automatically cause us to have a thought. And then that thought is what leads us to feel our emotions such as disappointed, insecure, overwhelmed, happiness, whatever it may be. And then that leads us to our behavioral responses of procrastination, talking with others, socializing, shutting down, whatever it may be. And these things are all connected together in one loop. Oftentimes, when we have one experience, one thought, feeling, emotion, it quickly bounces to the other thought, feeling, and emotion. And it just kind of keeps on going and going throughout our time. When these are helpful, healthy, helpful, positive thought process, this is really great. This keeps us going. But what can happen is sometimes we can get into a negative narrative and a negative set that this continues to cause our overthinking and feeling those feelings of overwhelmed and stress and figuring out how we manage those sort of situations. So, what we want to start to be able to do is to recognize how these thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all interconnected together, and then what we can do to work through those. So, important to be able to separate the difference between the thought, the feeling, and the behavior, because a lot of times they just get really clustered together as one big thing because it happens in an instant when we are experiencing these things. So, really being able to understand there's a difference between our feelings and our thoughts. So, a lot of times, though, we might say, I feel like she's mad at me. I can't feel that someone's mad at me. I think they are mad at me. Therefore, I feel worried and overwhelmed. And then I may act in a way of like either shutting down and being rude back to them, or maybe excessively calling, or however it may end up looking. So, being able to understand how these are all intertwined together and understanding the difference between those three things is a really critical aspect to looking at this. Another aspect that goes along with this is being able to understand what are the emotions that we are feeling. So the feelings wheel is one of my favorite tools that I use in all of my presentations almost when I worked with individual clients. They love this part. In the center of that wheel is our core emotions, happy, sad, and then oftentimes good and bad are in there when we're talking about emotions. And if we stop and think about it, that doesn't really tell us a lot about what it is that we are feeling. They're very broad and doesn't give us a lot of information. So when we can say, I'm feeling insecure, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling bored, whatever it is that you might be feeling, it gives a lot more information that then we can stop and say, okay, well, what's going on? What could I do with that information at that point in time? So what we want to do is we want to try to identify an emotion that's on the outer two layers of this wheel. This does not mean you have to work your way out. It's one or the other of the outer two layers. And so being able to identify the emotion, in therapy, we use a phrase of name it to tame it. So by being able to acknowledge and name what the emotion is, it can just bring down the intensity and to what we're feeling with that emotion, which may lead us to then a different behavioral response that we may feel or experience in that, which then could lead to that cycle discontinuing or changing what that cycle of the next thought that might be in there. So important to be able to have that understanding of your emotions. I want to give you just 10 to 15 seconds to take a look at this wheel and being able to check in with yourself. How are you feeling right now? So this is a really great tool for you to be able to use on a regular basis. Do that check-in. You can do a quick Google search of a feelings wheel. Something very similar will pop up to it. It may have different colors associated with it because this one is branded for Iowa, but it is something that they all are the same. And so being able to have that deeper understanding of emotions is extremely powerful when we're working on connecting our thoughts and our behaviors together. Another aspect with it is being able to work with our, what we classify, even though we don't want to classify them that, as our positive emotions. But a lot of times we don't also spend the time just to connect to say, I feel proud, I feel confident, I feel excited. And so when we can also connect with some of those positive emotions, that also helps us to build that resiliency and connect with that. So now let's look at what does this all look like together? Okay, so I know that my thoughts impact my feelings, but how does this look and what can change with that? So as I mentioned, our initial thought that we have is automatic. We can't control that initial thought that comes into our head, but we do get control of what we do with the next thought. We get to choose whether we're going to give that thought power, meaning, and pay attention to it, or are we just going to let it move on through that? So I want you to imagine this morning, you maybe had a little bit of a chaotic morning. You got out of the house, you are headed to work, you stopped, you grabbed a cup of coffee, you go to take that first drink, and then you have to break abruptly and that coffee spills on your shirt. What might be some of those initial thoughts that could pop into somebody's head in that experience? They may look something like some of these. Some of that worry and embarrassment that they're going to look like a slob for the rest of the day. There might have those thoughts of like, great, this whole entire day is ruined. And then therefore they may have difficulty getting focused for the day. They may be irritable and short with others in their life. And so how these thoughts can also pile up on top of each other. It may have started with the slob thought process. Then it moves into my day is ruined. And then this shame that this always happens to me and how this continues to spiral in that situation. Or we could work on having more of a neutral, adaptive response of, well, darn it, that's not how my day was intended to go. And I guess I'll keep on moving through that. And then maybe we can use some humor throughout the day to acknowledge the mistake in the situation that happened. So how we think about the situation is going to directly impact how we behave later on. So this is a little bit more of a lighthearted one, but now let's take a look. Let's say that you're in a work situation, you're in a team meeting and brainstorming, and you share an idea and the room just remains quiet. What might be some of those thought processes that come through your head at that point in time? More examples of how this might look and what this might carry over into that behavioral and how that overthinking and that spiral could lead to a lot of distress for someone. And now even think about, what if you spilt the coffee, then you went to this 9 o'clock meeting and this happened, and how these all things can pile up on top of each other. So understanding how those thoughts are impacting our feelings and behaviors is so critically important. So what do we do about this when we understand this? The first thing that we need to do is we need to be able to understand what we are feeling. Because we have so many thoughts in a day, we're often not very attuned to that. So how can we become more mindful and present with what our thoughts are? That might include a couple times a day, maybe, around this noon hour, maybe towards the end of the workday, maybe before you go to bed, stopping and pausing. What have been my thought processes for the day? What have they been? Have they been a positive narrative? Have they been a negative narrative? What was I thinking about those specific situations? And bringing the awareness to it. We oftentimes might need to put some time and distance between us being able to recognize those thought patterns and what is happening. There's a whole lot more to this than this, because our brains get into habits of thinking as well, just like we might get into a physical habit. And so being able to understand those habits is another component to this. But that first, being able to have that self-awareness to that. When we can put that time and distance between it, then we can see things a little bit more clearly and rational. And when we can see them more clearly and rational, we can think about, okay, what could I have done differently to learn from that? And then over time, just the same as we build muscles in the gym, our brain builds that muscle too. And we start to shorten our time frame, and we can start to catch ourselves having those habits of thinking more often and recognizing those unhealthy patterns that we are in. Then once we recognize we have this unhealthy pattern and we might want to challenge those thoughts or do something different, these 4 questions listed at the bottom can be those questions that you could ask yourself. What evidence do I have? Kind of thinking about putting your thoughts on trial. What actually supports this? What's the fact versus my perception of what is actually happening in this situation? One of my favorite is, what would I tell a friend? If you would not tell a friend you're such an idiot for speaking up in that meeting, why would you tell yourself that as well? So thinking about how you can have that self-compassion of, what would I tell a friend in this situation? And I'm not going to tell myself those same internal thoughts with that. A more balanced way of seeing this. And then also knowing that 2 things can be true. I can be nervous for this presentation and also feel prepared for this presentation. And that's an okay thing. So putting those 2 things together is another powerful aspect. So then another strategy, as we talked about at the beginning, is this power that we do have over our thoughts and being able to control our thoughts. But there are situations in our life where there are aspects that are out of our control, and we can use the control of our thoughts to be able to work through this. So this radical acceptance thinking is a strategy that can be used for situations that are out of our control. This could be things that have happened in the past, something that's going to happen in the future. It can be other people's interactions that are impacting us. It's a way to keep us moving forward instead of getting stuck in something that is not in our control. Now, to be able to apply radical acceptance, there's 3 key components that are important to this. First is we acknowledge the emotion that is attached to it. Those are the emotions that are associated with the feelings wheel. So things like, I feel disappointed, I feel insecure, I feel overwhelmed, acknowledging the emotion that is associated with it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to acknowledge that I feel, and then apply it with an and, not a but. A lot of times we will use but when we use but, it just negates what we just said right before that. And we do not want to negate the emotions that we are feeling. Our emotions are valid and we want to acknowledge those. So being able to say, I feel insecure, and then applying an acceptance statement. So I accept that this is the choice that they have made in that situation. That is the key thing. Now, another key thing with acceptance does not mean that you like it or you condone it. This is for something that is out of our control and we need to move forward. So I think about a personal example with me where I had a medical condition that was going on, and I was not able to make changes to the outcome of what had happened in that medical situation. And I would have to remind myself, does not mean that I like it or I like this, that this is happening to me. So reminding yourself every time you say that word accept, you might have to then repeat, that does not mean that I like it or I condone it. So really key aspect. So this is how it might look when it's all put together if you were to use this formula. I feel the emotion and accept, and then whatever the behavior or the circumstances that are present with that. So how this might look in a few examples that are related to work, I'll show in a minute. But before I show those, I also just want to be clear that these are examples for where you've done what you can. You have taken the action, you've taken the steps, and you have done what's in your control of what you feel like you want to do. And now you're at a place where I need to move forward and I need to apply some acceptance. This is how then those might look in that situation. So thinking about a project that didn't go well, we might have that thought process, that unhelpful thought process of that was such a waste of time. But you can see there how that disappointment and that acceptance of a learning experience is what can help us to move forward in that. Common with workloads, especially where the other example with like coworkers doing less. You might work in an office where people have very different jobs and different responsibilities. And so that might feel frustrating at times, but being able to acknowledge those pieces of what is in your control and what is not, and other people's behaviors are not in our control. So we might have to find some acceptance for those situations. Policy changes are also another key aspect. And like I said, these are things where you have done what you can, and now you're ready to move this forward in another way. So very quickly, those were a few strategies to think about how we do have control over our thoughts and what it is that we could do to better implement healthier thinking process, which helps us to be more resilient and have stronger leadership. So I'm going to pass it over to Beth now, and she is going to talk about connections in the leadership with others.
Thank you, Katie. I have to say, I loved that part of the presentation. And I also, in my own work, do a lot of just helping people to distinguish between what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and what they're doing. Because one of the things that we do know from the rich organizational psychology literature is that the more that people feel like they're in control of their life and of their work, the better, the more satisfied they tend to be at work, and the better they tend to do. And so this is something that organizational psychologists care a lot about. And I love seeing some of these strategies that you've pointed out, Katie. And I took so many notes because I think it's super helpful. I want to connect this a little bit to outside of the self, because in organizations, in our jobs, in our daily life, we are connecting with others constantly. And that is true even if you are like, I work remotely. You are connecting with people in multiple different ways every single day. And understanding yourself can then help you to understand the connections that you have with other people. And so I want to start with this quote from Dr. Robert Waldinger, who directs Harvard's study of adult development, which is one of the largest studies of sort of adult human thriving that we have out there, which I think is really interesting. And what he says as a summary is that the people who had the warmest connections with other people were not just happier, they stayed healthier longer, they lived longer. And his perception here is that we get these little hits of well-being from all kinds of relationships, from our friends, from our family, from our work colleagues. And it's that idea, this idea that we are not just putting our all into how like one relationship or two relationships, but rather we are investing in these little moments of connection throughout our day and throughout our week and throughout our life. But we also know that work can also have negative connections. And so we want to lean in towards those, pun not intended, about lean into these, these positive connections with others and away from negative connections. What do we know from the research on this? We know that negative connections at work are increasingly common. Just some basic research from recently, from the last 25 years, a third of nurses said that they had been verbally abused during their previous 5 days at work. This is an increasing problem in healthcare. I'm sure many of you out there who work in the healthcare field know this to be true. It's something we're often trying to address. And just broadly, 2/3 of U.S. workers have experienced or witnessed general incivility at work within the past month. People being dismissive, unkind, angry, backbiting, this sort of indirect aggression where you're talking about gossip and eye rolling, and 57% have experienced this behavior within the past week. Negative connections keep people away from workplaces. They keep people away from relationships, and they wear on us over time. And when we're considering these things that Katie talked about how are we about particular situations, and what does that mean about the thoughts that we're having about them and our reactions, and then what implications does that have for our behavior. This has direct implications to how we interact with people in our daily life, and that can have even particularly stronger implications if we're in leadership positions, but even if we're not, it has implications for how we act in the workplace. And so what we've taken, what the literature and what researchers have taken from the studies, these sort of little small hits of well-being, is toward a framework that we call high quality connections. And so what I want to talk about here today is how we can try to focus on those small little hits of well-being that we can get from high quality connections with others in the workplace. And so what I mean by a high quality connection is this short-term positive interaction at work that creates beneficial outcomes. And so the key here is short-term and positive. What I am not advocating for here, and it doesn't mean because they're bad, but because they're more difficult and because it's not the research I'm focusing on, is how to create like a deep best friend at work, which are wonderful and lovely and important for people's well-being. But what I'm talking about here are these small hits of well-being that are in the connection you're having with another human being when you're going throughout your workday. And a short-term positive interaction at work, a high-quality connection, will be focused on these three things. First, it will be positive. It will have positive regard. I think I like this person. I don't want bad things to happen to this person. I'm generally pleased in this interaction, right? There's also a sense of trust. That does not mean, I'm going to focus on trust here in just a moment. That doesn't mean that you're going to give them a social security number or like tell them your deepest, darkest secrets. What that means is there's an initial sense that this person is not out to get me in this interaction right now, right? That I trust I can be myself in this moment. And the third thing, which is important, is this is not just a, hey, how you doing as you walk by. There's an active engagement. I'm going to look someone in the eye. I'm going to actively stay present in that small moment, that short-term moment. It might be 30 seconds. It might be 3 minutes, but I'm going to stay actively engaged in that connection with this other person. We know this think, feel, and act thing again coming forward here. We know that these high quality connections can be useful to thriving at work, well-being at work, health, job satisfaction. And we also know that there are things that we can do to facilitate more of our interactions being considered high quality. So the first is we can adjust and focus on what we think about other people. And that means taking people's perspectives. So what do I think this person sees? How do I think they see the world? How do I think they think about the world? And being just generally aware that other people are around us at any point in time. I think I can speak, I'll just speak on behalf of everybody to say there are times we go through our lives where we are totally not aware that there are other people in our space. We are focused, we are going through, we're not necessarily aware of those things. When we want to invest in these high quality connections, we need to be aware, oh, there's another person here and they're engaging in their day. I wonder what they're thinking. I wonder what they're feeling. Then we can think about what we feel towards other people, which is not necessarily Katie's point about this person doesn't like what they're feeling about me, but what am I feeling about them, right? Which is, do I feel gratitude? Oh, they asked how I was. That's nice. I appreciate that interaction. There's this idea of how we feel about we know that emotional contagion and mimicry, when someone smiles at us, we smile back. And I think there's a sense of, well, is that authentic? Maybe I'm not happy. Well, sometimes we can engage in this emotional mimicry, and it actually does facilitate positive emotional reactions in us. And we can think with empathies, which if you notice here, I have perspective taking and empathy. We separate those in the literature where we say perspective taking is thinking from another person's perspective, thinking what is another person thinking, and empathy is engaging with what another person is feeling, and that those are very strongly related, but they are different. And we need to make sure that we are engaging in both of those things to be able to facilitate these connections. And then we have how we act towards others, engaging as many respectful moments as we can, as many opportunities to look people in the eye, to smile or engage in that sort of emotional contagion and mimicry. And to show respect for how people want to be greeted, how they want to be engaged with. And we also know, interestingly, that anytime that you can facilitate and play or help other people, those tend to be qualities of high quality connections as well. So if you are a sort of person like, oh, this is annoying. Why are we playing together? Why are we engaging in these games? Those actually can be related to, if we shift the way we think about those things, to higher quality connections and the well-being that we can get from engaging with others. I want to just quickly dive in a little bit into the role of trust here, because I had mentioned it as a quality of a quality or a component of a high quality connection. And you might say, well, okay, what do you mean by trust though? Because I'm not necessarily sure that I trust everybody that I work with. And I'm saying that you should try to engage in connections with people that are facilitated by trust. I really like this interaction from a scholar consultant, Snow Academy. You can see the link there. I highly encourage you to look up. I think I found it to be really helpful when I present this to clients and folks that I'm working with, is to think about trust in a number of different ways. The first is that we can trust people, that sort of bottom pillar there, which is about benevolence. And this means that, I believe that they have my best interest at heart, right? I believe, in this person's benevolence towards me, their kindness towards me. And you can show that to other people, and they can show it to you through warmth, through active listening, to vulnerability. I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of my own comfort for you, and to not take advantage of people. And so again, that might be the sort of trust that you're showing in that high quality connection. Another type of trust might be what we call integrity related trust, which is how congruent are the words you're saying and the actions that you're taking. This is, I'm going to be as transparent as possible in this interaction. I'm going to do what I say that I'm going to do, and I'm going to play fair in in my interactions with others. There's also a third type of trust, which is trust in someone else's ability, which is, not necessarily just a general idea of how smart and competent you are, but I trust that you can do the job. I trust if we're on a team together, I don't just have to be like, oh, I trust this person's going to keep my secrets, or I have to trust that you can actually do the task that's been given of you, right? That you have that ability. And that can be shown through, I'm going to display my knowledge, I'm going to manage your uncertainty, and I'm going to apologize and take responsibility for the mistakes that I make. One thing that I like about this kind of tripartite model of trust, which is fairly predominant in the literature, is this idea of the consistency that's on the side of this slide, right? Which is that how do we reinforce this trust? How do we build this trust over time? Is through consistency in our behavior, right? Do these things over and over again, and we start to build trust. Have these high quality connections repeatedly, and that trust will build every single time. So we go in, for instance, we might go into the interaction with, all right, I believe you're a good person. I don't know if you can do this job. I don't know if you're telling me the truth or not, but I do believe that you're not trying to take advantage of me. And then through consistent behavior, I might say, oh, well, now I believe in your integrity, or now I believe in your ability, or it could work the other way around. And I think it's important that we understand the different facets of trust to help us understand ourselves better and to invest in our relationships differently. So how do we do this? What are some examples for yourself and for other people? I think first things first, be aware of your colleagues that are around you. I think sometimes it is when we are actively focusing on self-awareness, which is super, super important, it can cause us to disconnect a little bit from others as we try to focus on what we can control in ourselves. And as important as that is, we need to also always be thinking of the fact that we are embedded in social structures. And if we know that these connections with others can be a positive source of positive emotion in our lives and of positive thoughts and reinforcing those positive things we think about ourselves, then we can use that awareness to help facilitate connections. Monitoring yourself for warmth. It is not inauthentic to return a smile to someone, even if you're not feeling happy. It is an act of kindness in some ways, right? I think there's this idea of, well, if someone says, how are you doing? And I'm like, fine, but I'm not fine. Am I lying, right? And I think it just depends on what you're trying to get out of the interaction, right? Am I trying to have a high quality connection, something that fills my cup versus drains my cup? And how much do I trust this person? And what am I trying to get out of those interactions? So monitoring yourself for your warmth behaviors can be really helpful in that, particularly if you're not necessarily a naturally warm person. That's not what you're naturally good at. You can practice those sorts of things and practice that active listening and those engagement attitudes. Thinking about how other people think and feel is a great exercise no matter what. It helps expand our ability to think broadly. It helps expand our creativity and openness to experience. And it also helps us to invest in our relationships. Showing gratitude is another way to do that. Saying a genuine thank you, it goes so far in our high quality connections with other people. And showing gratitude and taking a gracious approach, which I'll talk about here in my final slide in just a moment. Respect at all times. Sometimes if we were going through the emotion wheel that Katie put up, there might be times where we don't really feel like being particularly respectful. And perhaps this person is making us feel jealous or frustrated or irritated or angry, and we may not feel like being respectful. It is important, particularly when we're in social workplaces. Workplaces are by nature social, that we try to engage in respectful behavior at all times. That doesn't mean we stay out of touch with what our emotions are, but it means that we try to engage in those sorts of actions with respect. And then the more that we can practice taking turns in an acting play, the more likely those connections are to be considered high quality and to feed our well-being. If you are a leader, there are a couple of other things you can do as well. And these can be helpful for everybody, but the perspective in taking an empathy is particularly important for leaders and particularly important for you to role model to your employees. Oh, I hear you saying this. Is this correct? Right? This is what I see. I think this is what you're feeling. Am I spot on that? And that can help you again to demonstrate those high quality connections and to build that trust in our connections. One of the things that I often lead with when I talk to organizations is something called grace or generous intent. There was an organization I worked with that used this in their interactions at all times, which was, what is the most generous way I can interpret this other person's behavior? And let's use that as our starting point. And what that means is, instead of starting from the most ungenerous interpretation of what their behavior is, I'm going to start from the most generous. That does not, sometimes the most generous intent is not a good intention, right? I'm not saying that you have to assume everybody is doing well or doing right by you. What I mean is, okay, it's like those Snickers commercials, right? When someone's acting really mean and they're like, I think you need a Snickers bar. The idea is the reason you're acting this way is not because you're a bad person, not because you're mean, it's because you're hungry, right? I use this with my teenager all the time. I don't know if she thinks it's funny as much as I think it is now, but just maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe it's not that they're mean or a bad person or they don't like you. Maybe they're just having an off day. Maybe that's the most generous intentions that I can put behind their behavior. And then I can use that to inform what I think and what I feel and what I do next. If you can role model that as a leader, then you start to be able to dial down on some of those negative connections that can happen in the workplace that are escalated, particularly when they're mediated by technology, when you can't get tone, when you can't get intention, when you don't have all of the social cues and information around that communication. And the final thing that I'll say here to role model these sorts of behaviors is think about what sort of power you have in your organization, in your place in the world, to enact risks on behalf of other people. I mentioned that sort of benevolent trust really comes from demonstrating vulnerability and showing someone you have their best interests at heart. Some of us in organizations, in certain rooms and certain moments, have more power or less. And when you can use that on behalf of people who have less power, you tend to instill more trust in other people and facilitate a cascade of high quality connections. So with that, we, I think, have some final tips here, Katie, that we want to do and talk. And Nick, would you like us to share those now, or should we do Q&A first? Oh, you're muted, Nick. It wouldn't be a Zoom meeting without a mute talk.
I know. Let's do the Q&A, and then we will go back to you for your final tip-ease. So that was great information. I too have all sorts of notes, screenshots, and as a reminder, this is being recorded so that you can go back and revisit it later. But if you have a question for Katie, Beth, both, drop it into the Q&A feature. That's the question mark icon down below. But in the meantime, we'll get things started with some of the pre-submitted questions that folks sent in when they signed up. So a big one on the topic of boundaries. When workload exceeds the hours in a work week, how do you manage it without working weekends?
Katie, do you want to start that with sort of managing what you can control for yourself, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's a key one of what are you willing? So Nick, the question was specifically when workload exceeds the hours in a week.
Yes.
And being able to think about what aspects are in your control. Does that allow for you to be able to have a conversation with your supervisor about what that workload looks like and what that is expecting? Is there ways to manage your routine differently? Are there little pockets in your day where you are not effectively using your time that you could change those? That also might include, are you taking some breaks in your day as well? That might seem really counterintuitive, but when I am working with my college students, telling them cramming for an exam at the last 5 hours is not an effective tool necessarily. Being able to have some self-care and taking some breaks can go such a long way in being able to reset your mind to come back and focus on the work that is at hand. You can spend that time just spinning your wheels and not making any progress, or you can say, I got to take a break here so I can reset and come back to it. And those are some of those strategies that are in your control that you could see about implementing. If it's not what you got isn't working, then how can you challenge yourself to try something new that may seem scary, but it could have some big payoffs in the end?
Beth, you were talking about trust. Carson asks this question: how do you gauge where others are at with their trust in you based on those three categories?
Yeah, I think that's a very common thing. I think first things first, I will say we talk about emotional intelligence a lot, and that's really generally talking about your ability to ascertain what other people are feeling and thinking and adapt yourself to those. And the first thing that I will say is those are absolutely skills. We talk about it like it's an ability, emotional intelligence. You're born with it, and either you have it or you don't have it. That's absolutely not true. These are skills that you can hone through repeated practice and focus. And so that's the first thing I want to say. So if you're like, I am a person who does not I don't get what other people are thinking and feeling. I don't understand those sorts of things. Those are skills that you can improve on, and everyone can improve on these things no matter who you are. They may be harder or easier for you based on, where you're starting, but understanding those perspectives, taking skills, like going through exercises of what do I think this person is feeling? What am I feeling? How do I separate what those things are and understand? I think Katie's point before, which is I feel like this person doesn't like me, and acknowledging, oh, that's a thought and not a feeling, gives you a sense of control over what you can do. When we're trying to ascertain whether someone else trusts us, right? It's important to first disentangle our own feelings about the interaction, right? What am I scared about? I'm scared this person's not going to like me. I'm scared they're going to judge me. I'm scared they're going to, right? Versus what is the actual information that they're giving me in this interaction. I like to think about those three pillars of trust because they help me to ascertain what's really going on in an interaction. If I'm getting a vibe where I'm like, this person doesn't seem to be being fully themselves around me, or I'm not really sensing that something just doesn't feel right in this interaction, I can kind of do an inventory in my head and be like, okay, is it because they think I don't have their best interest at heart, benevolence? Is it because they think that I'm not being honest with them, integrity, or is it because they don't trust that I actually can do the things I'm telling them to do? Where's it broken? And that helps me to ascertain how to repair that relationship. I will also say that something in the book that my colleague Tina Opie and I wrote, we talk about this a lot, which is it is a real point, talking about what you can and can't control, to get to a point where you have to acknowledge that not everybody is going to like you, that not everybody is going to want to engage in a fulfilling, trusting relationship with you. That does not mean that you still can't have high quality connections on a short-term basis with them that are characterized by trust and engagement, or not, well, some sorts of trust, right? Where you are trusting them and trying to facilitate an increase in trust. And there's positive regard there where you are engaging in something positive with them and being actively engaged in that connection. And I think trying to focus those things out and determine the difference between those things can really help you say, okay, here's what I can control. I can control the information I share with them. I can control the warmth that I'm showing with them. I can control my own positive emotions in the interaction with them and how I facilitate that. I can ask questions if I want to do that. And I can also choose to say, it's okay. We don't need to be besties. I can just make sure I'm respecting them every time we interact with them, and I can let the rest go because not everybody has to like me or want to be my best friend. And that is truly a moment of release. And when we're in workplaces, I think that's a very hard thing. I see this actually a lot with young women who go into the workplace who are like, I need everybody to like me. And I'm like, no, you don't. You need everyone to respect you. And those are different things. And so learning to disentangle those things can be helpful.
So, kind of an extension of that, what suggestions do you have for maintaining your own well being when working with people who don't value it?
Katie, would you like to start with that one?
I think it comes to understanding what your values are. And I guess the question to that also is it just a colleague who's not valuing it, or is it maybe leadership And so you're seeing it modeled from the top down. And so that makes it hard for you to know how to exert yourself. Those would be two different situations in there. But being able to hold kind of to Beth's point of like, not everyone's going to like you. It's to the same of like, not everyone's going to do the same things as you, and that's okay. And so when it comes to self-care or well-being, is to understand you got to do what's best for you and how you're going to show up as your best version of yourself versus what works for somebody else in there. So when it comes to like self-care and that self, which is what I would equate to the same as well-being, is, for example, like I despise reading. So if someone told me to go read a book, I would be like, oh my gosh, this is like going to be excruciating for me. But for other people, that's exactly what fulfills them. That's what fills their buckets. And so you got to be able to find where can you get the self-confidence to know this is who I am and I got to do what's best for me. And unless there's consequences that are coming down from leadership with it, then be yourself and be your true authentic self to do what it is that is in your control, because that comes around to what is in your control, those behaviors and those routines.
And I think to that point, just to because I think it's such great advice, and I think also that sort of self-care component really does work best when you are actively engaging with that self-awareness, those self-awareness tools that Katie was mentioning kind of before, of what am I actually thinking, feeling, and doing? Because sometimes you can say, well, this is just who I am, when you're trying to avoid self-improvement, or you're trying to avoid what your true goals are. And so what you want to be careful when that you're checking in with yourself regularly and saying, okay, how is this serving me? Right? Is it stretching and challenging me and I need that? Is it helping to make me better? Is this not serving me? And being honest with yourself, I think, if you want other people to be honest with you, I think being honest with yourself is what I am often, whether it's with my students or with the clients I talk about, which is, what are you really feeling here? What are you really scared of in this moment? What are you really concerned about in this moment? You can tell me. Or at least tell yourself, because what you don't want to do is to avoid good change because you're scared of it. You want to really be clear about in what way is this affecting my well-being, right? And in what way have I ceded control over my well-being to other people's interactions with me? And how can I wrest that control back?
So, speaking of self awareness, we've got some questions about burnout and stress, starting with, what are early warning signs of burnout?
Yeah, I'll start with that. Burnout's one of those constructs that started because we all know it. Like, we all know it at a really deep moment. And I think it's very funny. Researchers were really, it's one of those things that came out of observation of people's behavior. And like, what is that? What's going on here? And I think one of the things that I like to think of it in a lot of ways is that, and we have one of the world's foremost experts in employee engagement, for instance, which is the kind of flip side of burnout, which is, are you engaged with your energy, with your thoughts, with your behavior at work? Are you disengaged? And I think that disengagement is one of the first signs that burnout is coming on. Are you feeling very disengaged from other people? Are you feeling disengaged from things that you once loved? Are you feeling disengaged from things that once challenged you or dreams you once had? That disengagement, that numbness can be a really first early sign that the real burnout is coming in. And if you can really focus on promoting engagement in those moments, then you can stave off some of that burnout.
So, another kind of related to that point is the idea of, and you alluded to this a bit as well, prevention versus treatment. How can we address well being proactively rather than reactively?
I can jump in a little bit here, and I want to go to one thing that Beth was just saying there too with the burnout aspect. Another thing to really separate with burnout is to recognize that it's associated usually with one aspect of your life versus it carrying over into, it can carry over because we're humans. And so what happens at work carries over into our personal life and vice versa. But when we're noticing that exhaustion, that disengagement, that irritability, that is focused just in one aspect of our life, that's a real good sign that that's the burnout versus maybe a depressive disorder that is coming on or other aspects that might be coming in. So wanted to note that part. But then the question was related to prevention versus event intervention sort of things. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
So I think the key thing is building that awareness, doing those regular check-ins with yourself. I think a lot of times, like, we just don't have a great understanding of who we are, even as humans. I do a values exercise with people, with my clients before, and they think they know what their values are, but they're not acting in line with what those values are. And so when we do that activity, they're like, oh, that this is what's happening, and this is where there's a disconnect that's happening in my life. And so things that you can do to just bring awareness to, who are you? What is it that you like to do? Being able to have that understanding of what your thoughts are and what your feelings are. Being able to acknowledge those things that you're grateful for. Beth mentioned the gratitude aspect. We talk about, there's kind of that cliche thing of doing, like, say 3 things that you're thankful for. But if you keep doing that day after day, you just end up repeating yourself, and it does no good. But what if you picked up a gratitude journal that then has questions about, what was an act of kindness that you saw today? Who's someone that you admire? What is something that inspired you today? Those are the things that help you to build that self-awareness as to who you are, and creates that prevention versus needing that intervention down the road.
Yeah, and I think we do. Katie's point is such a good one. We have very rich research that we can have some control over our moods. And I want you all to understand that sometimes we can feel like we are, prisoners to, or just really not, we don't have any control. This is just, we're just in a bad, like, we don't have any control over that. And we can do those things. And I don't mean to diminish people who are in depressive, episodes, or who have true concerns, because we all do. And we all have moments where this is a season of difficulty for me right now. And that's fair. But there are always things in our life that we can try to find control about, and always ways that we can make improvements on the moods that we're in, right? And we can make choices around those things. And I think that is a hard thing to balance in your life, and if you're a leader or anything like that, which is, acknowledging that we all need to feel like we're in control of our lives. We all need that, and we all need to find ways to exercise that control. And it's excellent prevention for burnout and promotion of well-being. I think personal control, autonomy is one of the most studied psychological constructs out there, and it just, like, never fails to be associated with positive things. Like, it's just, people want to feel in control of things. And I think if you all check in with yourselves and, like, when have I felt my worst? It's when you felt like everything was out of your control, and you felt like things were spiraling and you did not have control over what was going on. But usually if you check in with your feelings that way, you'll notice that that's not 100% true. It could be things are out of your control in this area or in this moment, and practicing radical acceptance of those things, while also saying, but what do I have control over? It sounds, I think, some cliche to say, count your blessings or be happy. But there is research around this idea that if you can try to refocus the way you're thinking about your own life, it can, help you wield benefits for those things. And, being proactive, really knowing yourself, it's one of the trends that I think has gone both ways recently, where we do, I don't know how many of y'all were these people. Like, I love taking the quizzes in magazines. Magazine quizzes aren't things anymore, but that's what I love doing. I was like, let me take the quiz. Like, what am I? Am I a lion or what? I don't know. Anyway, there was always something you were going to figure out, know yourself well. But in a lot of ways, there were, like, horoscopes where everything was good and universal. And it was really a surface level of knowledge. And I think sometimes we can fall into that now, which is, I'm going to believe things about myself that make me feel connected with others. Oh, we're all introverts now. Or I'm going to believe things about myself that make me feel good about myself. Well, I work so hard, no one understands me, right? And that may be true in some ways, but really, really getting to know yourself and engaging in that work to self-awareness, I've not seen it backfire in terms of trying to lead to better well-being, because it doesn't mean that your life gets easier. It means that there are more tools at your disposal to change the things that you need to change. And I think I talk to a lot of my students who are on the cusp of their, new working lives. And they'll say, like, you always seem so positive, and you always, like, your life seems so easy. And I always say, well, like, some of this is choice. Like it's hard to be optimistic about these things. And I'm not saying I'm always positive, but I know myself well enough to know when I'm spiraling because I've put 4+ years of that work into it, and I've suffered the consequences when I haven't. And I think it is, the relationships things matters a lot to me, as I'm always like, I'm not investing in these things enough. I'm not filling my cup the way I need to. And there were times where I couldn't pull myself out of it because I didn't have the skills yet, or I needed other people to help me to find those skills. People like Katie to say, here's the things that you need to be able to do. But these, again, are skills, and you can learn them, and then you can wield them on your own and on others' behalves.
Well, speaking of skills, as we wrap up, like the Tippie Leads podcast, we like to ask our guests for a quick final tip for folks listening to apply in their work.
So for mine is just being able to make sure that you recognize how powerful your thoughts are and that you have that control over your thoughts. Not every thought that comes in our head needs to be entertained and given the power and the meaning behind it. We can let some of those thoughts go. Not every thought is actually true.
I love that tip so much. And just I'm writing down even more things for myself for later, which is great. My tippy is make your connections count, even those ones that you think don't matter, even those ones that you think are just a passing moment at a coffee shop or, one moment passing in the hallway. Be as present and positive and generous as you can in all of those, because as you're helping to fill other people's cups, they'll fill yours in return.
Beth and Katie, that was awesome. I am so fortunate to be in a community with connections like the both of you, as are all of us who joined us for today's Lunch and Learn. Remember, to learn more about building your skills and being the CEO of your life, you can tune in to season 4 of Tippie Leads, which premieres tomorrow on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you like to listen and watch. Speaking of watching, this session has been recorded and will be available on the Tippie Alumni and Lifelong Learning pages, as well as our YouTube channel. And remember, next month, we're sticking with this theme, being CEO of your life, as you'll learn to be the CEO of your calendar, mastering the high stakes yes and the strategic no with Rob Rowenhorst and Michelle Williams. They'll share practical strategies to audit your time, build the habits that create momentum, and master the art of saying no without burning bridges. That's coming up on Tuesday, April 28th at noon, and the sign-up link is right over there in the chat as well. After the webinar, a brief survey will appear in your browser. Please take a moment and share your feedback to help us enhance our future programs. On behalf of everyone at Tippie, thanks for joining us, and go Hawks.